Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to the very first No Money Film School commentary track. That's right. This is a new endeavor that I have just started. It's something that I've wanted to do for quite a while, but didn't quite know the best way to do it. What better way than to expose the next generation of filmmakers to the art of filmmaking than by taking a deeper dive into classic cinema, the best way, which is to watch the movie with you and to analyze it from a couple different perspectives, such as screenwriting, directing, cinematography, acting, music, all of the above. Now, just for a little info on me, Dane Kyle, my background is I am a writer, director, producer, a little bit of an actor. I've edited before. I've done, a little bit of everything, and also, if it's something that I haven't directly done, like composing music, then I've had a hand in, music selection or like very strong opinions about it. Point is that I've got a good, well-rounded knowledge base on what it takes to make a movie. And if you are anything like how I was when I first started out, and I didn't really know where to start with filmmaking, the best way to learn is to watch movies, some of the best movies ever made, and to really analyze them and to understand what is it about them that works so well. What tricks can you pick up as an aspiring filmmaker? How can you learn about film theory? How can you learn about screenwriting and structure? Well, that's what this particular podcast is intended for, and that's what these commentaries are intended for. Now, obviously, for copyright reasons, I cannot actually show you the movie while we are watching it, but what I'm going to do is what I've seen other YouTubers do or other podcasters do in this scenario, which is to you and I will both have our copies of the movie, however we get it, and I'll tell you when to push play, and you can watch the movie along with me. Or if you don't happen to have it in front of you and you know the movie already and you know it well or whatever, you can just listen along. Maybe you'll get something out of it that you didn't know before. But this really is intended for people that want to really learn the art of filmmaking from a filmmaker and someone that cares to try to give the next generation the tools to succeed. Um, so, anyway, the first film that I want to do, just because it's pretty easy to find and most people know it, and even if you don't, it's pretty easy to come by, is 1985's Back to the Future, directed by Robert Zemeckis and starring Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. And I went with that one because, well, it is pretty common to find. It is something that I think is a pretty good, easy dive into exactly what I have in mind, but also it's one that, because even though most people know it, it's one that maybe you haven't really thought about it in terms of screenwriting structure or in terms of building effective tension, planting and payoff, those kind of screenwriting tricks. I think this film has one of the best screenplays written for film, certainly a popular film that most people have seen. And that's primarily what I want to focus on, but obviously, as other things come up with acting and scoring and stuff, I will mention them. But this is a film particularly for those that want to understand good basic screenwriting structure. I think this has to be one of the best structured scripts ever, with very iconic dialogue and with the right blend of economic dialogue that moves the story forward, but also, it adheres to that 2 hour, 120-page structure. And we're going to take a deep dive into exactly how the film does that. So, all right, enough of my yakking. Let's go ahead and watch this thing, shall we? All right, I'm going to give you a countdown, and you can push play as soon as I tell you to. All right, so 3, 2, 1, play. All right, so now we're starting off. Now, the reason I picked this film beyond the reasons I stated is because, well, a lot of us have seen this film as a kid, and it's one that really, I think, stands out to us. And there's a reason why, because it is so well structured and because it gets a lot of information into our heads very quickly, even in these opening credits. One of the most effective things that you'll see with any good script is that we either start right in the middle of an action, or in this case, even though there's not really an action scene or anything too exciting happening, we've already got themes established very quickly with time. A little overtly, you might say, because of all the clocks everywhere, but this thing will quite literally deal with time and time travel. But right away, we've established our theme in the opening scene. Got a good Harold Lloyd homage there with the guy hanging off the clock. But a good screenplay, I think, does that, where you establish theme very quickly, and as we're going to see, you get a lot of subtle exposition information given to you visually, such as there with the Brown mansion destroyed. That's Doc Brown's family, his fortune kind of having been squandered in certain ways by being a scientist and that sort of thing. And then we've got the radio here, where we've got the car announcement. We've got, we're going to find out about the Libyans and that sort of thing. Right away, we see the fact that there's a lot of automation in this house, but that he's clearly not been there for some time, and we're wondering why that is. And the plutonium theft there, it's like all this stuff's coming at us. We don't know it necessarily that it's going to be important right away, but it most certainly will be. But this is all really good screenwriting right here, because you're getting a lot of detail, but it's not in any kind of clunky way. It's all woven into the scene. And what they tell you about exposition meaning that you tell the rules of the world, you tell the backstory, all that stuff. They tell you to sneak it in your script by integrating it into the action. And again, we see plenty of automation here with the breakfast machine for the dog, but we see a lot of evidence that he hasn't been here, the doc hasn't been here for a while. And that's going to be very important, particularly because the dog food piles up here. And so that's just a really good screenwriting touch. And in comes our protagonist, Marty McFly. One of the things, again, this is all done predominantly visually. Now, there's some dialogue, but it's all pretty, incidental. But get a lot of visual clues here. We see that he's got a skateboard. We see that he, is a young kid. And right there's the missing plutonium that we saw on the news there. So it's pretty subtle. You may not even catch it the first time, but that's a really good touch there. And by giving our protagonist something to do, we give him a clear interest. Actually, two of them. We have the interest of the skateboard, and we have the rock and roll thing. With this particularly hyped up, souped up amp there, which goes way beyond 11, so going way past where Spinal Tap was, goes all the way up to 100 there. But we give our protagonist a very clear set of interests, so we automatically know a few things about him before we even see his face. And they're not even showing us his face right away. I love the comically ridiculous amp size there. But again, that really helps to flesh out your protagonist through behavior by giving him or her a clear interest that will help us to know who that person is through behavior. Because again, one of the rules of film is you show, don't tell, meaning that you allow for behavior to dictate who your characters are rather than just telling us through clunky exposition dialogue. So right here we get the idea that he's interested in rock music, but also that he's still a kid. He's still, not above making mistakes and, getting in over his head, which we'll see, as we go along. And before we even formally meet Doc Brown, we hear him on the phone here. Another key aspect of good screenwriting for this type of story, this kind of archetypical, well, they're rooting it in archetypes, and particularly we've got our master and apprentice archetype with Doc and Marty. Marty is very clearly the young King Arthur, the Jedi Padawan, the however you want to think of it, and Marty is the master. He's the Merlin. He's the Jedi Master, the teacher, and that's an archetype that's as old as time, and we all recognize it. But rooting your story in, if it is kind of a more archetypically driven story like this one is, rooting it in an archetype can be very effective to getting the audience to understand what kind of story it is. And archetypes can be very effective for these kind of sci-fi, action, superhero, fantasy type movies, because it just helps to get us rooted into the story very quickly and easily, because the rest of what we're going to be seeing is so extraordinary. So that's just a good touch. Now, that doesn't apply to every movie, but in this case, it works really well. And we also see here with the Skitchin there, which that's very much a product of its time. Oh, look at that, Toys R Us, R.I.P. With Skitchin there, we see that he's somebody who he's trying to be the cool kid, but also, he's not above kind of breaking or bending the rules there. So again, we're learning about him through behavior. And we're also getting the layout of Hill Valley in this version of 1985, which again, we'll get to know Hill Valley very clearly throughout the story, because we're going to see it in a couple different iterations, like in this version of 1985, as well as the kind of idealized 1955 plus the revised 1985. And we meet up with Jennifer there, who I think Jennifer, honestly, I don't know how much room there would have been to really make her into a more fleshed out character in this film. She gets more to do in the other two, in part 2 and 3. I don't really know how much room there is for her in this story, but I do feel like they might have had more of an opportunity there. Then again, she does get more to do in the other two, but right here she's just kind of the girlfriend, and that's about it. Now we've got a secondary antagonist here who... antagonist might be a little too generous, but just an opposing force in our protagonist's life. Someone who lays out very clearly what the stakes are going to be, what kind of personal obstacles our hero is going to have to overcome, by bringing up the past, bringing up the fact that he's too much like his father and that no McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. And Marty has that great line of history is going to change, which in context, that has a great double meaning, because he thinks that he's going to succeed where his father has failed. But as we will soon find out, history will indeed literally change, because he will travel back in time. So that's just a good example of great dialogue there, to where if you can have dialogue that has multiple meanings in context, then that just helps add some depth to your story. And especially if it doesn't have to feel too on the nose or too much like you're trying to be, cute or deep or whatever. But again, this is all very critical stuff that's being told to us through very naturalistic feeling scenes. And again, that goes back to Bob Gale having written such a beautifully structured, beautifully written script. So we've got, again, small details here that are going to be important. Re-elect Goldie Wilson, for mayor, and we're going to see exactly how he gets there. But again, we got a clear protagonist with clear interest, but we've also got a protagonist with some flaws. He's got trouble with rejection, just like his father, and he is in danger of indeed repeating the past. And you see ways in which this could not work out for him, where he could be just like his father. So, and you got someone that, he's still inexperienced. He's still learning the ropes. He's still perhaps, reaching for something that he can't necessarily get right now, but he won't get there unless he tries, unless he has the confidence. And you've also see some other additional smaller aspirations from our protagonist, with him wanting to take Jennifer to the lake in that Toyota, which, one thing I never understood about this movie is, after having driven a time-traveling DeLorean, why would you care about a 4x4 Toyota after that? I mean, then again, people drive cars for work, and then they have their cars that they have at home, so maybe it's something like that. And then with this information here, this exchange about Marty's mother, you get the sense of what he thinks of his parents and what he's been told about their lives. and how we're going to find out the degrees to which that's not true and some of the generational differences. We need to talk about theme, which again, sorry, more expositional bits here with the clock tower there. We need to talk about theme a bit because themes are very important for your story. Um, I think establishing a very clear sense of theme and a couple different clear themes throughout your story will help to root it in something that is preferably universal, but for sure just will let the audience know that you have something deeper to say. And I specifically chose this film because, again, this was a big mainstream movie that I think has some really great themes about. Well, again, it's got the archetypical master and apprentice relationship, but it's also got the idea of kind of the differences between generations and how some seemingly very different generations can actually be not so different. What you find in here is that Marty's parents, despite having grown up, that they did a lot of the same stuff that he and Jennifer are up to when they were kids. And so that's a theme. Kind of humorously playing with incest is another theme. Got some Oedipal themes going on there. But again, it plays with them very subtly and very skillfully. But also, again, the idea of can you change? Well, in this case, he changes the past in order to change his future. But even more than that, I think Marty learns about the reasons why his present turned out the way it did and how he can learn those lessons to avoid some of the same mistakes that his parents made. And we've got our antagonist set up here. And now that okay, so a couple things. So yeah, antagonist set up here in a very comedic sense. He's a very funny villain, but again, in the future films, he'll get to be a very threatening presence in his various incarnations. But what I was bringing up before, or attempting to, was the fact that he is a good antagonist in the sense that he is a bully, but he's played very well, and I think written in such a way that he, despite not really going too far away from the archetype of the bully, I don't know, he's just given personality, he's given good charisma, he's given good material for an actor to work with, and I think we get some great stuff here. Very clear character relationships between George McFly and Biff that will get played out, in the past as well. A lot of these same dynamics they keep carrying over. He's behaving just the way that he did back when they were in high school. He hasn't learned it all, which is, again, that's very clearly established through behavior there. What I was trying to get at before with, besides theme, it's important to establish tone in your film. This film, I think, manages to blend tones very effectively. I think people will often describe this as a comedy, and I think, they're perfectly, it's perfectly good to do that. What I love so much about this film is that it's got a little bit of everything. It's got, a lot of comedy, got romance, it's got some good thrills in there too. Like there's some amazing tension in the climax, which we'll get to when we get to it. But I think it's just got a great blending of tones. It's very entertaining. It's very enjoyable. It's fun to watch, but it has plenty of real world stakes. It's not just like a farce or anything. And that to me makes for the most effective comedy. It's when you're able to have the funny moments offset with dramatic ones or with thrilling ones or whatever. And again, this is a great example of how to do that well. And again, some small details here that we're getting shown that will come back later. Getting off of screenwriting for just a moment, I have to give a lot of credit to the makeup department because the makeup job here, I think, actually holds up very well. I'm looking at it on the 4K restoration that came out in October 2020. And the makeup holds up remarkably well for the actors that like Leah Thompson and Crispin Glover, who are going to be playing high schoolers back in 1955. They're going to be playing high schoolers. But the makeup that they wear here looks pretty darn convincing, I have to say. So yeah, special shout out there. But Yeah, I just think I love that reaction from Crispin Glover. Um, oh yeah, and the same with the Uncle Jailbird Joey there. Another small detail that's going to come back. Basically, it kind of establishes the fact that the McFly family, that they're kind of losers in certain respects, and kind of always have been. And we're going to see how that changes as Marty goes on his time traveling adventure there. Um, and again, this is one of those. There's a lot of just exposition being dumped here, but again, the exchanges are very. They're done very effectively because the dialogue's really good. It feels very real, and that's a great way to sneak in your exposition. And it's also because you don't think that it's exposition. You don't get a lot of facts thrown at you that feel like facts. They feel just like it feels like you're really watching a family unfold, a real interaction unfold before you. That's ideally what you want. You want your character interactions to feel so natural that how could they not be saying these things in this situation? Relative to the rules that you've set up, of course, because not every movie works the same way. Some dialogue's more stylized than others, but in this case, you feel like it's got a good blend of relatability, but also it's funny and enjoyable to watch. Also, um, but yeah, I think yeah, there's just a lot of really good critical key information being shown to us here. Um, Very good performances as well, which the performances here I think is probably some of the best performances that these actors, all of them, Christopher Lloyd, uh, Michael J. Fox, and Leah Thompson, and Crispin Glover. I think these are some of the best performances they've ever given. Which he's sleeping in his clothes because if you remember in the beginning, Doc told him to be ready to join him for the experiment at around 1 o'clock or whatever. And the here's an interesting detail that I think it might have been in earlier drafts of the script, but I don't think it didn't make the cut into the finished product. Partially because we don't really need to know that. To know this information, we can kind of infer it based on their interactions. But apparently, in earlier drafts of the script, Marty stumbled upon, if I'm remembering this correctly, he stumbled upon Doc Brown's lab when he was like a younger kid, and instead of like getting him into reporting him to the police or to his parents or whatever, Doc Brown kind of took him in as a friend of sorts, like a unofficial apprentice, and so that's kind of where their friendship came from. Plus, it kind of helped keep him out of trouble, because as we saw with his home life, that it's not the best. But that hanging around with him kind of helped to keep him out of trouble. Now, again, we don't really need to know that, and I'm sure that's why it didn't really make the cut in this final version of the script. But it's just kind of an interesting little bit of backstory there that we don't really get to see. Introducing the DeLorean, probably my favorite movie car out of all the movie cars that have ever been, even more so than the Tim Burton Batmobile, even more so than the Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger. Um, I don't know, it's just, it looks beautiful. And I totally agree with Doc Brown's assessment that if you're going to build a time machine, why not give it some style? Speaking of whom, here's Doc Brown. Yay! Marty, you made it! Um, which Christopher Lloyd, again, totally on fire in this movie. It's his most iconic role for a reason. I think he really infuses the character with a lot of energy. He's able to rattle off the technobabble really well. And he's able to make, well, the script obviously helps significantly in this area. Because time travel plots are very hard to do in a way that makes sense and in a way that flows for the sake of the story without it feeling too didactic or feeling too bogged down by technobabble or anything. And this film manages to make it flow beautifully. It never ever feels like too much is being thrown at you at once. And because of how good Christopher Lloyd's performance is, you feel like you just feels like it rolls right off the tongue. Now, to be fair, the particular theory of time travel that they are using in this film, it is of a simpler variety than you might have seen in other other later time travel films and TV shows. Like in Lost, for example, they toyed with the idea of saying, whatever happened happened. In other words, that you can go back in time, but you can't change it. You were always destined to go back in time if you did. Versus, like, say, in Avengers Endgame, where each instance of you changing the timeline, it doesn't change that timeline. It just creates a new timeline in a branching pattern. This film sticks with just a simpler idea of one single timeline that you can change and alter, which, for the sake of a film all about time travel, and especially at this era, is probably for the best, even if the theories about time travel change over time, which, as of this recording, no one has managed to achieve. Not that we know of, anyway, but um, yeah, good little touch there. I like that Marty kind of backs off to the side there because he's kind of nervous about what's going to happen there when this baby hits 88 miles per hour. Um, and again, brilliant effects here. I mean, the effects are relatively minimal. Now, the 80s were kind of the era of burgeoning movie effects, largely thanks to Star Wars having revolutionized movie effects. There aren't all that many special effects in this film, but the few that are here, they're done really well, and they mostly hold up well. Gotta love the iconic streaks of flame there. Um, Here's a good way to mess with people's expectations here. The rubber there from the tires, it makes for streaks of flame, and yet when the time machine, when it comes back into, well, because it went 1 minute into the future, when it comes back, it's actually really cold. And I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. That's a good way to mess with the audience's brain, because you never want the audience to feel like they know what's going to come next. You always want to defy their expectations. And it's a tricky thing because this film does have a lot of clever reversals and things that are unexpected, while also adhering to a lot of conventional script structure. And I'm going over all this in kind of a cursory glance. If you want more information about what proper screenplay structure looks like and feels like, I would highly recommend doing some research into, like, Sid Field's book Screenplay is a really good one to look at. But also just doing your research on proper screenplay structure, and obviously the more of these that I do, the more of an idea you'll have about what exactly constitutes that. But this film, just in your own mind, is just a good one to adhere to. Like, keep this one in your mind as a good template for what proper 3-act structure looks like. And what do I mean by 3-act structure? Well, films typically have 3 acts. Act 1 is the setup, Act 2 is where the drama gets heightened and the stakes get raised, and then Act 3 is the climax. That's where the stakes, that's where they reach their, there's, for Act 1 you have your rising action, Act 2 you have your midpoint, and Act 3 you have your falling action, your descending action, meaning that that's where the things you've set up get paid off. And usually you want your third act to be the tensest moment in the whole thing, and this film most definitely does that. The climax is by far the most intense part of the whole thing. Which, again, this would be a lot more helpful if I were doing this in the context of a screenwriting class where we would have hopefully covered these concepts already, but let this just be your first introduction into those concepts of rising action and falling action, that kind of stuff. Now, again, we're getting some more exposition, but it all flows really well because it's not overly long. And this could have been a lot clunkier than it is, but it manages to flow so nicely. Many credit, a lot of I love they said witness the birth of Christ December 25th, the year 0, except that any biblical scholars out there will know that that's not the correct date. It's like 6 BC in April, I think. I want to say April 17th, but I could be wrong about that. And again, we get some good synchronicity here with the fact that November 15th, 1955, when Doc discovered time travel, which happens to coincide with the 30-year time span for when Marty's parents meet, which you could possibly say that that's a little coincidental, but I don't think it's too out of the realm of possibility. What I was always told in my screenwriting classes is that you're allowed one coincidence per movie. Um, and my professor said, in my world, you have none. Um, in this case, I don't think it's too, far out of the realm of what we could believe, but it is just something to think about. Yeah, this fascinating idea about breeding pine trees, which again, small detail that's gonna be important. Even Marty filming this whole thing, that's gonna prove to be important, and you don't necessarily think it will, but it will be. Now, I'm pointing out all these little things as they come up because, again, this film is brilliant in establishing so many little things that you don't think are going to be important, but they all matter. They all come back. And that's called planting and payoff. So you plant an idea, or you plant a theme, or even an object like the camera there. If it's in the film somewhere, then you need to have it be there for a purpose, and that's where the payoff comes in. And it can come relatively quickly, or it can come, you can save the payoff all the way to the end. It just depends on what it is. But like in this case, just watching this film again, you look at all those little details and you determine exactly what those things are and how important are they and when do they come back into play, that sort of thing. And again, this film is just brilliant at being able to set all that up and pay it off effectively. Now, what do I mean by the 120-page story structure? Well, the runtime of this film is approximately 2 hours, and in traditional screenwriting structure, 1 page equals 1 minute of screen time. And so in other words, you have a 2-hour film that equates to 120 pages approximately, and that can help you to structure out your movie properly. So like approximately if I recall correctly, like about 25% of your movie should be Act 1, 50% should be Act 2, and 25% should be Act 3 if you wanted to plot it out on a structural chart like that. That's not always the case, though, because there are some movies that, like, in other words, the screenplay for the Lord of the Rings films, the scripts are actually quite a bit shorter than the actual runtime of the movies themselves, and that's largely because the action scenes take up a lot of time. So that doesn't always match up, but it's just a good rule of thumb, and it's more true than not. And again, as we see an important detail there, he's like, I almost forgot to pack extra plutonium, which obviously will factor in very heavily in the film. Now, here's a little aspect of the story that has certainly aged. The idea of that he got the plutonium from Libyan nationalists and that kind of stuff, which, again, it was 1985, so the particular realm of geopolitics was different then than it is now, and that's to be expected. That happens all the time with films. Like one of the James Bond films, The Living Daylights, has to do with the Mujahideen, and anybody that knows their geopolitics know that they eventually would form the Taliban. So again, that's just what happens. Film is a document of where we are at a particular point in our culture, in some form or fashion. Even though it's a work of fiction, it still reflects where we were at that time, so that's why it's important to think about that. Now you might say also the fact that the gun jams there, that's sort of coincidental, but, again, not too far out of the realm of what could reasonably happen. And again, important action sequence here with Marty under fire there, and we've had so one thing that they'll also tell you is that with these kinds of movies, with kind of some action oriented films, is like action beats, meaning something like usually you want to have them happen at least once every 10 pages, like, and it doesn't have to be an action sequence, but it could be just something really big has to happen, to make sure that the story's moving forward and that it's not getting too stagnant. In this case, we quite literally have an action sequence, but it comes at just the right time in the story. You never ever want to feel like tension is ever being lost, which we should probably talk about tension in film. Tension is basically what are the stakes, what's the danger, what are the forces in our hero's way to prevent him or her from getting what he or she wants. And in this case, there's quite literally an antagonist, with a bazooka about to, or an RPG or whatever that is, to blow him up. And but you never want to have the audience feel like they're too safe, like they can just chill out for a while. You want to always keep the stakes rising. You want to always keep the movie moving. And here we go. We're back in 1955 now. We got this funny scene with the scarecrow and him crashing into the barn and all that good stuff. Which again, tension, and then you release the tension a little bit, and then you build it up again, and you release it a little bit. That's how you manage to you hold the audience's attention by maintaining that tension, but you know how to let it loose just a little bit to where you feel that sense of relief, so that way you can build it up again. You think about it kind of more in terms of almost like a roller coaster, how roller coasters will often lure you into a false sense of security. Like maybe they might fake you out with a smaller drop as opposed to a larger one, but then they'll build you up for the really big one. The movies work in much the same way. And in fact, you could say that theme park rides, kind of some of the best designed ones, kind of have their own stories, especially like at a place like Disney World, where there will be something of a story kind of interwoven into the ride itself. So, that's a good metaphor to look, a good image to have in your head when you're thinking about your story. Which classical way to set up your script is a fish out of water story, which in this case, our hero, who we have established very clearly with his interests, his likes, his dislikes, his dreams, his goals, we take him, we establish how he is in his environment, the rules of his world, and we take him out of that environment. And again, the funny part is he's still in the same place. He's still in Hill Valley. He's 30 years in the past, which, it's important to realize that he's not on some other planet or in another part of the country or the world or anything like that. He's in the same exact place he was in. It's not a time and space machine. That's important to remember. Which, as you can see, it says Twin Pines Ranch, but he ran over the pine, which you're going to see later that Twin Pines Mall becomes Lone Pine Mall because of his having run it over. And all that setup that we saw with the neighborhood having been a little bit run down, right here we see that his neighborhood is just being built. So again, all those little details that got established very subtly are now being paid off one by one. And again, this was in the pre-CGI age, so they had to make sure that they plotted out exactly where to put the old version of Lion Estates versus the 1985 one. Here's an interesting thing about this film. Like, I talk about the universality of its themes and how clearly those themes are established, which is definitely true. Like, the themes that are in this film, they're just as relevant now as they were then. But what's interesting is that this film is a universal story. Like, it has really not aged, and yet it manages to do so despite the fact that this is explicitly a film set in two very specific time periods, which normally people will accuse a movie of being or feeling dated or whatever. But I think because the storytelling is so good and because the archetypes in this film, with the master and apprentice relationship and that sort of thing, the Oedipal themes that we'll get to once we meet Marty's young parents, once we get to those, I think that kind of helps to overcome the fact that this is set in time periods that are now quite old. I mean, the 50s are receding more and more into the past with every passing moment. Same with the 80s. Like 1980 was over 40 years ago now, so at least at the time that I'm recording this. Um, oh yeah, and look at that. I never noticed that we have a Barbara Stanwyck and Ronald Reagan film playing on the theater, which obviously 30 years later, Ronald Reagan would be the president of the U.S., which, of course, they make a joke about that later. This is kind of a fun little getting to know Hill Valley as it was scene. So it's like we're establishing the world, but it's the same place, but it's just in a different time. So for the sake of the story, it's almost like Marty's landed on another planet, but he hasn't. And of course, we got the Mr. Sandman song to help set the period there. Hill Valley looks quite a bit different than it will later look, and the clock is working, which you gotta love. Again, from a thematic standpoint, you have to love the fact that a clock, a rather imposing looking clock, in fact, is hanging right over their heads the whole time. One storytelling device that you will hear about a lot is the ticking clock, and again, that refers to a way of maintaining tension within your story by having some goal that is that has a limited time to transpire. In this case, what we're going to find out is that they have one shot because he has no more plutonium with which to get back to the future, back to 1985. So he's got one shot, which is to hit the bolt of lightning that strikes the clock tower on that exact day and time. So despite this, again, being a time travel story, there is a ticking clock for having to be at this specific place at this specific time. But that's the first ticking clock, but this film actually has two. It's got that, and it's got the fact that because of his presence in the past, which wasn't supposed to be there, the fact that he's kind of inadvertently screwed up the events that will get his parents together, thus endangering his own existence. So he's got the fact that there's a possibility that he and his siblings may not in fact exist. So this film has two ticking clocks. And again, from a scientific perspective, you have to wonder just how solid that really is, because again, this is going by the idea of like one singular timeline that can be altered instead of branching timelines and instead of the other theory I mentioned. But again, it still works in the context of the story. And we got some good comedic lines here with he's like, give me a tab. I can't give you a tab unless you order something. And okay, give me a Pepsi free. You want a Pepsi, kid? You got to pay for it. And that again, that kind of just helps to comedically break the tension, and you could totally believe that this kid would say those things because he doesn't know any better. And again, it's kind of, I love this, the fact that they're posed the same way and they turn at the same times. That's just a great touch there. We see young Biff here, and he's doing the same stuff to his father that he's gonna do to him when they get 30 years older. So again, good payoff of what we set up before. I just realized this film actually, in a lot of ways, this feels a bit like what some episodes of The Twilight Zone were trying to do, as far as now the Twilight Zone was heavily truncated into half-hour segments, half-hour episodes, rather than a full feature film, but this does cover some similar Twilight Zone type of stories. Yeah, the stories that they covered is kind of similar to what would happen in this film, with a character in a strange place and having to confront some aspect of their past, that kind of stuff. You'd see that a lot in the Twilight Zone. What's he eating there? Is that oatmeal? I don't know what that is. I don't want to see you in here again. Yeah. I like this kid with the 3D glasses on his face. That's just funny. Now, is that oatmeal or is that cereal? I don't know. I love the look on Marty's face here, that he's just so stunned at the fact that he's seeing his father as a young man, which, now you talk about, in some ways this is kind of a father-son story, kind of an unconventional one, because again, he's encountering his father when he's his own age. and plus, you've got Doc Brown as kind of a surrogate father figure, because his own father, George McFly, is such a fuck up, really. Um, oh yeah, and then here's young Goldie Wilson here. Um, but anyway, yeah, you got some aspects of a father-son story, but again, it's very unconventional because it's his father is a young man, so you often kind of wonder that about your parents. It's like if you met them when they were your age, would you get along with each other? Would you how much of them would you have inside of you? That sort of thing. And this film definitely explores that. And you see some areas in which they differ, areas in which they're the same. And I love that line, Goldie Wilson. Mayor Goldie Wilson. I like the sound of that. I always like that line. And here's where the primary, hey Dad, George, you on the bike. This is where the primary tension of this film begins, because well, again, two ticking clocks. He has to get back to his own time, and he only has one shot to do it. But more pressing is the fact that he has inadvertently put his own existence at risk. And again, it's such a funny way of thinking about, because I'm sure we've all thought about, like, if this hadn't happened, if that hadn't happened, then would we even exist? Would our parents have met? Would we have even been conceived? That sort of thing. And this film definitely takes it and runs with it. In a brilliant way. And it is one of the few films I can think of that really touches on Oedipal kind of incestuous themes in a way that never feels like gross or sleazy, but it manages to, still get all of the comedic possibilities out of it because, as we find out, Lorraine, Marty's mother, in 1985, she presents herself as this very kind of sexless woman, this mother. But then, and like, oh, she never had interest in boys or anything. But then what we're going to find out here is that she's actually kind of repressed and very sexually explorative, as a lot of teenagers are. But again, just very quickly, good screenwriting fake out here because we think, oh, are they going to pull a "it was all a dream" kind of thing? Which, okay, that is the cardinal sin, that you never ever do that. But they delightfully play with that cliche, and they even do a good job of faking you out because they had Lorraine there. She spoke in a kind of lower register, kind of like she does when she is older. um, and then she says that she's back in good old 1955. So there's a great way to fake the audience out. And again, good, good, sexual tension here between these two, despite the fact that she's his future mother. Uh, and I love the fact that she calls him Calvin and all that. That's just some of the funniest stuff in this movie. But again, I think you talk about again, you got the incest themes there, which are handled in a very fun way, and it never feels grosser or like too much for the audience to handle or anything like that. Um, but again, another theme that you find here is this idea of sexual repression on behalf of the mother, because she's very sexually forward with Marty here, which she was supposed to be with George, and that's why they even got together. Because she had this, which Doc will later describe it as the Florence Nightingale effect, the idea of, she falls in love with the victim, because it was supposed to be George that got hit with the car. So that's a very key aspect of her psychology as a character, and that kind of helps give her some definite personality and some definite, things for the actors to play with. Um, and one thing that a lot of movies prior to a lot of this, well, we've had a lot in the way of like female writers and directors and stuff. One thing that you would find in prior to this more recent era of female artists getting more of a voice, one thing you would find out a lot of the time is you'd have male protagonists, and you'd have their girlfriends that didn't really get a whole lot to do, and that kind of stuff, which you see that a little bit here with Jennifer, but then again, I don't really know how else you'd really fit her into this plot. And again, she gets more to do in part 2 and 3. But with Lorraine here, like, she has a lot more to her underneath the surface there, and I think she's remarkably well portrayed, and it's just important to make sure all your characters, large and small, that they all get important things to say and do, that because otherwise it's like, well, why are they there? And it doesn't matter, female, male, this, that, or the other thing. If you have a character in there, they need to be doing their part to advance the story forward. Luckily, everybody in this script does on one level or another, and especially with Lorraine, I think that she really does a good job of advancing this story forward and providing that kind of comedic, sexual tension, but also, you do kind of wonder about your own parents, to what degree, how were they when they were young versus how they are now. What's the difference there? Which I like this whole thing, this, what do you mean you've seen this? It's brand new. I saw it on a rerun. I mean, that, I don't know, these whole exchanges, they're just so funny. I mean, this is one of those things that you have to, like, just watch these scenes to just really appreciate how good the comedic dialogue is. Obviously, I can't do it justice. Just if you watch the dynamics of these actors and the how naturalistically this dialogue flows, but also in some ways it's kind of like the mirror image of the first dinner scene that we saw. To where this is a dysfunctional family of a different sort. Like, it looks very orderly, and in many ways it is, whereas Marty's future family is very disorderly. This film's very orderly, but again, you see like this. Yeah, see, she's grabbing him under the table, and she's clearly, wanting to throw herself at him. So there's a lot underneath the surface. Plus the fact that I forgot to mention, you saw the baby of the family. You saw Uncle Jailbird Joey there, and he's like, better get used to these bars, kid. So you again, you see some of the seeds of what his future family will be like. You see the seeds being sown, and he's an idiot. Comes from upbringing. Parents are probably idiots too. Lorraine, if you ever have a kid who acts that way, I'll disown you. One of the best comedic lines in the whole thing. I mean, you could do a whole podcast, a whole commentary track just about comedic writing. So I'm having to try to do kind of structural a first go at how screenplay structure works based on this thing, but you could totally do a whole other one based on comedic screenwriting and dialogue writing and that kind of stuff. Now, interestingly enough, Marty's parents have changed quite a lot in the 30 years that that they got together, had kids, that sort of stuff. They changed a lot. Doc Brown has not changed seemingly at all, which that's kind of an interesting contrast there. If anything, he's the same person that he was, but just perhaps more intensely so. Plus the fact that he's trying to make an invention that works, and we know obviously that his greatest invention, the time machine, that it will work. And oh, by the way, you can see on his head there that he has bumped his head, so that was a recent event. When he bumped his head and he got the vision of the flux capacitor, but he's still trying to get some other invention to work, and he just can't do it. But unbeknownst to him, the idea for the time machine has already come into his head, and it's just Marty's helping him to realize exactly what all he's got, what all he had in his head in the first place. That this damn thing doesn't work at all. I love that line. I love the how eccentric his headdress is there. I think that's. He says, "I hadn't invented a time machine," but he reaches and feels where he hit his head. And another great comedic bit there with his driver's license. He says, "Tell me, future boy, who's president of the United States in 1985?" That whole thing. That was another great comedic touch there, and obviously having been set up already. Um, Boy, who's president of the United States in 1985? Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, the actor? That's so good. Who's vice president? Jerry Lewis? Suppose Jane Wyman is the first lady. That's funny. Um, but yeah, that's actually halfway decent bit of kind of gentle, political satire there because Reagan still was the president at the time, and yeah, our hero here is kind of pushed to his limits. Like this is his last hope, and that's why he's really going for it here. He has no other solution, but he obviously is able to tell the younger Doc. He's able to tell him exactly how future Doc was able to succeed with making the time machine in the first place. Very good spooky lighting here with the fog and everything. I've been so busy talking about screenplay structure because it's such a good script, but like we need to talk a bit about the visuals here. Like for the most part, it's lit pretty evenly. You got some stylistic lighting here and there, nothing too crazy, but like this is our first time when we really get to see some real mood, real style here. We've got fog, we've got the lights from the car, we've got the early drawing of the flux capacitor there. Like this is a big dramatic moment because it really weighs on Doc Brown. The fact that he made it, because he even exclaims it works, I finally made something that works. So it definitely, you feel the drama in the air here. So that's a good example of visuals complementing what's on the page there. And through mood, because if you've ever been in certain parts of California, like I lived in Monterey for quite a while, or like 5.5 years, and certain parts of California, especially like that kind of central to northern part, they have plenty of fog and stuff, so that's a good utilization of some of the natural environment there. And again, all that stuff that got recorded on that camera all comes back, to show. Well, there you go, a photographic record of something that hasn't happened yet, and it helps to catch young Doc up to speed, which I kind of wonder. Well, they don't really. Again, this is kind of a minor detail. I kind of wonder how they were able to hook up the. I wonder how they were able to even hook up the thing to that camera to an older television. I don't know because see, I was born in 1991, so I was used to like AV outlets and that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, we have HDMI, so if I don't know if those cameras, if they were designed to hook up to TVs that old, but even if they weren't, then I'm sure Doc could have rigged something up. But 1.21 gigawatts, iconic line. And now this is, where are we in our timeline here? We're a little before the halfway point. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So if you think of the structure of a script as kind of like a parabola, like almost like a roller coaster. You rise up, you hit the midpoint, and then you fall. We're approaching our midpoint right now. We're not quite halfway there yet, but we're getting there. We've had plenty of rising action. We've had plenty of increased stakes. We've had plenty of clear things that our protagonist needs to achieve in order to get back home, but also to become a more fully realized human being. But this is really where things start to come into focus because we have the first ticking clock is established, because remember that flyer that he got in the street, that's how they know when the bolt of lightning will strike. Which now a gigawatt is a fictional unit of measurement, if I recall. I think that part of why they did that is because obviously real lightning strikes are very, very almost, I don't even know, can you accurately measure them? Anyone listening, please tell me. I don't even know if the true energy capacity of them can be, necessarily harnessed as well as it can be here. But, but again, for the sake of the story, it works remarkably well. If we could somehow harness this lightning, channel it into the flux capacitor, which, he delivers that so well. But again, for the sake of the story, like we're gonna assume that one single bolt of lightning can deliver the necessary electrical charge there, and that You must not leave this house. You must not see anybody or talk to anybody. Anything you do can have serious repercussions on future events. Do you understand? And he's like, yeah, sure, okay. He's like, Marty, have you interacted with anyone else here besides me? Yeah, well, I just might have sort of bumped into my parents, which again, we got our second ticking clock here established with some good mood lighting here on this nicely decorated interior of Doc's house, which we actually haven't seen. I just realized we never saw Doc's house in 1985. Actually, no, we did. Sorry. We saw the lab area. We didn't see really his living space. Um, so that's an interesting thing. Really clean this place up. Looks brand new. So again, important differences between the two time periods there. Um, and yeah, he's rattling off the exposition, the technobabble, very effectively. Um, which again, very good comedic scenes here. I would say if you wanted to, if you were categorizing this film on your shelf, I would put this in the sci-fi category, but you could easily put this in the comedy category. I mean, it's kind of got both, but again, it's got the romance, it's got the thrills and everything. So, yeah, Strickland, Jesus, didn't that guy ever have hair? Um, which again, you want to be a slacker for the rest of your life? It's just, yeah, this is where they explain the Florence Nightingale effect and that sort of thing. Um, and here's an interesting thing I just thought of. So this came out in '85. So generally speaking, when it comes to nostalgia as a concept, generally speaking, nostalgia comes in 30-year cycles. And how do I know that? Well, it's because in a lot of '80s movies, you saw a lot of remakes of '50s sci-fi films or references to the '50s, things like that. I'm sure you could probably scientifically measure it, that nostalgia probably comes in a cycle of 30 years. Um, and you saw some of that in the '70s, although I don't think nostalgia was quite as much of a prevailing force in the culture as much as it has become. And you really saw that come into full effect in the '50s, I think. You saw that really begin, like a lot of, like, seriously, watch a lot of your favorite '80s films and you'll see a lot of influences from the '50s, if not outright references, if not outright remakes of '50s films, such as like The Fly was a remake of a '50s film. The Thing was a remake of The Thing from Another World, that sort of thing. um, and ever since that time, we've seen nostalgia waves come in 30-year cycles. So, like the '90s, everything was the '60s again. The 2000s, everything was the '70s again. The 2010s, everything was the '80s again. And then in the 2020s here, I'm sure everything's going to be the '90s again. Oh boy. But this is the first film I can really think of that explored those themes of nostalgia in the way that we understand nostalgia. There's a rhythmic ceremonial ritual coming up. Great line. This is the first film that I think really explored the concept of nostalgia in the way that we think of, in the modern sense. So that's pretty cool to think of. But nostalgia is inherently an illusion, and I think that this film definitely shows just why that is, because we see some things that were true and then other things that were just totally false, about the way that things used to be. And it's just in this like 1 week in 1955, let alone what the rest of the world was like. Um, I do love that he doesn't know that his father ever wrote anything creative, and it turns out that Marty is helping to inspire his future father to take chances, which Marty himself is afraid of doing because his father was afraid of doing it. Um, and yeah, so good continuation of that father son story theme. Because he sees aspects of himself, some of those aspects of himself that he doesn't like, he sees them reflected back at him in the form of his younger father there. And same with like when he says, what if she says no right here, right now in the cafeteria? What if she said no? I don't know if I could take that kind of rejection. Same thing that Marty said. And again, Marty ends up finding himself in this kind of heroic role that he isn't really up for, by having to save his future mom from Biff there. Um, which, again, brilliant performances from everybody here. Oh, not that kind of girl. Which, again, the funny thing is that she kind of is that kind of girl, at least as far as our dear Marty, aka Calvin Klein, as far as he's concerned, but certainly not with Biff. Butthead, perfect insult. Sorry, just again, there's so many iconic moments in this. It's like you just kind of want to sit back and enjoy them. But since I like the fact that he just assumes that Marty's new here. I'm gonna cut you a break today. Now, why don't you make like a tree and get out of here? Classic line. It just shows what an idiot Biff is, but also like what a he's like probably the best bully of all time in like the classical conception of what a bully is in film. Um, I do love that he just kind of assumes that Marty's new, but then again, I don't know how that'd be probably the most believable cover for him. So that you gotta love the fact that so besides obviously being stressed out about getting his parents together and getting back to his own time, there you would have hoped that there might have been some kind of downtime for Marty to be able to maybe kind of sort of enjoy the 50s a little bit, but probably not too much because he doesn't want to change too much more of history than he already has. Not you or anyone else on this planet is going to change my mind. Again, the photograph there, that's such a great way of measuring the ticking clock that we've got going in our story here. Oh, again, another there's quite literally a clock there, and this whole shot of George being asleep there, that kind of mirrors what we saw with Marty being asleep and getting woken up by Doc. Edward Van Halen there, that tape. Uh, oh, that's just so funny. Crispin Glover is so funny in this movie. Um, and again, the look of the plutonium suit that matches well the magazine that George is reading, but also it matches the comic book that the kid in the barn had. My name is Darth Vader. I am an extraterrestrial from the planet Vulcan. That's hilarious. He's just mixing and matching sci-fi left and right. You do that to nerds nowadays, and they'll get all offended. Oh, good little synchronicity there. So he's trying to open the Pepsi bottle, Pepsi Cola, as it's known at that time. Trying to open it by screwing it, and it's the pop top kind. So George has to do that. That's a good little touch there. Because again, keep in mind, Marty's not a know-it-all. He's still very much a fish out of water there. So that just helps to reinforce the fact that he's not perfect. And George, in some ways, is helping him out just as much as Marty's helping him out. Again, so that's kind of a father-son story, but also something of a buddy comedy in a way. Again, this is where if you have a flair for comedy, which not everybody necessarily does, but if you do, this film, especially this whole middle act here, is just a fantastic example of how to do good comedic exchanges in such a way that the characters feel really believable and their interactions feel genuine. But yeah, this whole middle act, I think you could really, if you're a comedy writer, this is good. This is fantastic stuff. Look at that. So the front of his shirt was poking out there, and he has to remember to tuck, or Marty has to nudge him to get him to tuck it in there. Lou, give me a milk, chocolate. Yeah, that's the mark of a true badass right there. Yeah, wipe that chocolate milk off your mouth there, George. Um, Gotta love the 50s diner there. They gotta love the aesthetic, the fact that that was like the place to go for, kids and all that stuff to go. And my density is Bobby to you. I remember that was a line that like my family and I would always say to each other. I'm your density. You gotta love malapropisms. Malapropisms are so great. Um, Yeah, again, I think this middle act here is just amazing for comedic dialogue here. Um, and she's just totally not into George at all, and yet Biff is gonna come and shit in the punch bowl for everybody. Pardon my language, by the way, but I should have probably said that in the beginning that I sometimes, I can get a little, you know, use some four-letter words and stuff. I try not to do it too much, but these things happen. Now I remember when I was a kid, I saw this whole bit where Marty really, he's really showing his bravery in a way that he didn't really before. Oh, Biff, what's that? Smacks him right in the face there, which I remember cheering when I saw this movie as a kid, and I saw that. Now Marty, I don't think Marty would have done that in his own time period. I think he was having a bit of the George McFly syndrome, not as badly as his father, because as far as we know, Marty hasn't really had any experience with bullies in his own time period, at least not that we're shown. Um, but again, he's showing a lot more bravery than he probably would have shown in his own time period, let alone what he would have shown had he not had all these stakes. Sorry, he's just had to grind. He had to do a little grind there and get a sketch on the back of the truck there. Yeah, I think Marty's one of the things that people have said about this film is that Marty doesn't really change, but he changes other people around him. I do agree that, I mean, I kind of sort of disagree with that. I agree in the sense that people around Marty change more than he does. But I think Marty does change. I think he becomes a lot more self assured and a lot more capable than he necessarily would have been had he not gone back in time. Because, again, remember, he didn't have the bravery to, send in his demo tape to the record company, which he might after this point. We don't know. But it's I think he's showing just what he's really made of, just out of necessity, and that's one thing that you really want to have in your story is you want to have circumstances that push your protagonist to his or her limits and to where they have to really show just what they're made of and they rise to the occasion. That's what makes them grow as characters. Yeah, classic running gag throughout this series is the bad guys that run into manure, which again we'll see continuations of that in part 2 and 3. And again, you gotta love the fact that we set up clear behavior, clear hobby of his in his own time with the skateboard there, and he's able to make use of that here again, planting and payoff. I don't know, but I'm gonna find out because Lorraine is very hot to trot, shall we say. Oh yeah, by the way, one thing that we need to touch on, so kind of glossed over it because I was talking about other things, but so in 1985, Doc Brown got killed by the Libyan terrorists. Here's the video evidence of it. The videotape does not say who exactly is after him or why. And Doc Brown's clearly curious about it, and he's clearly kind of shaken up by it, of course. Who wouldn't be when facing their own mortality? But being the true scientist that he is, he says that he doesn't want to know about what happens to him because he can't know about his own destiny, and because it might endanger his own existence, just as you've endangered yours. Which is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But Marty, of course, he's seen the death of his mentor and he wants to save him. And again, it's like I think that's something Marty struggles with. You talk about a clear character. He's someone that he's motivated by the fact that he wants to do right by his only real friend that we get to see. He wants to do right by him. He wants to do right by his parents. He's motivated very much by compassion and love. And sometimes, it causes him to act before he thinks. And, in this case, it's something that really weighs on him because he wants to save his friend's life, and who wouldn't? So again, that's something he has to struggle with throughout this thing is, well, trying to wrap his head around these circumstances, but how to do what's right without being too hot-headed. And obviously that's a theme that's going to be explored in part 2 and 3 because he gets all triggered when people call him chicken, and that's going to be his undoing, which again, don't want to get, that's a different movie, but yeah, that's just a continuation of that theme, is to he has to learn how to deliberate more and how to not be too impulsive and not too kind of out of control emotionally, which this is actually a good foreshadowing visually. Okay, so this visually foreshadows what's going to happen, what they're going to plan to have happen. But as you can see here, release. So off the car goes. We visually get to see what they intend to do, and so the cars get set on fire there, and it because again we saw the flames with the we saw the flames with the tires there. So as far as this experiment goes, that definitely did work. Although he says you're stilling me with a lot of confidence, Doc, which that's funny, because clearly there's still danger in the air there. But oh yeah, by the way, we're past the midpoint. The midpoint would have been around the '50s diner scene. So yeah, we're over halfway through here. We're getting into the somewhat of the falling action here. The stakes are rising, that sort of thing. But again, we've got some good foreshadowing because even though if we've seen this film before, we know that their model version of the experiment, it did in fact work just as it was supposed to. But the fact that, it set the car on fire and then it set the rag on fire and all that stuff, that is meant to keep that tension going while also helping to foreshadow what's to come. And again, good comedic dialogue here, but it also helps to reinforce the man that George will have to become, as well as the man that Marty is able to become by, being strong and going after what he wants, protecting his woman, all that kind of stuff. Which again, you have to love the fact that she wants to be asked. She's asking him pretty much, and so again, she's very forward. She's really bought into him, hook, line, and sinker, pretty much. Which again, that says a lot. And again, we continually reinforce those stakes. We continually keep that tension going. We don't let the audience get too comfortable. I think a man should be strong, and so he can stand up for himself and protect the woman he loves, don't you? Yep. So again, we have another clear objective there. So, that helps to keep the thing moving. One thing that you will find a lot, here's someone here's a good contemporary example of someone that doesn't really follow this rule. At least I don't know if he ever really has, but he's tried to deliberately subvert this rule. Is someone like Quentin Tarantino, who will allow his characters to kind of hang out for a while and to talk about things other than the plot and that kind of stuff. And he's trying to be more avant-garde. He's trying to be more experimental. He's trying to make what he calls hangout movies and that kind of stuff, which, he's gotten into such a position that he can afford to do that, and he can afford to kind of have his own style and that kind of stuff. But for you, the starting off screenwriter, a film like this is a good one to look at for inspiration, because it does follow the proper, just normal 3-act structure and proper protagonist, growth and evolution and that kind of stuff. So if you're looking for people to emulate, well, obviously, look to people that inspire you in some way, and that can be someone like Tarantino or someone who's more experimental. But as far as really dipping your toes into screenwriting, something like this, or like Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope, or, what's another good one? Chinatown, The Apartment, those are some of the scripts that people will typically point you to when you're first getting to know screenwriting. That they'll typically point you to those as good examples of how to do that well. Which again, highly recommend Sid Field's Screenplay as a book. That will really help to allow you to see what these things look like on the page. If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. Again, that's going to be very important. Because as important as it is to actually watch the finished product, and it is, obviously, because that's what the audience sees. That's what goes up there on the screen. It's important to look at what this stuff looks like on the page, to kind of see it in your mind. When I was first learning screenwriting, I think that was the hardest part about the whole process, was just being able to look at a film scene on the screen and try to visualize in your head how it will look on the page and vice versa. It takes a while to do that, so I would highly recommend, if you're able to track down scripts of your favorite movies, which you can usually do that if you just type in Back to the Future scripts. You can usually find versions of them very easily accessible. I would highly recommend you do that, because then you can compare the film. Sorry, he's trying to. Whatever you try to tell me, I'll find out through the natural course of time. Which again, he's trying so hard to save his friend. He's trying to do the right thing, but that's the question, is like, what is the right thing? Is the right thing to try to preserve, the timeline and let things run their course, or is it to try to save his friend and do right for him? So that's why he's trying. You got to give him credit for trying. What I was saying is, your favorite movies, you can usually find those scripts online pretty easily. Very good to be able to compare the film on the written page as opposed to the film on the screen. Sometimes you'll notice interesting differences, whether it's differences in dialogue or structure or whatever, especially if you read an earlier draft of a script, but it'll just help you to be able to visualize what a film looks like on the page versus on the screen. And if you're in the habit of reading screenplays that have not yet been produced, as I have done many times, then sometimes that can it allows you to judge whether or not the screenwriter has done his or her due diligence as far as really painting a picture for you, the reader, to get a good sense of what the film will eventually become. So now we're moving into, we're kind of moving from some second act territory into third act territory. Maybe not quite into third act territory, but maybe like second half of the second act. And we've set our stage, quite literally. We set our stage for how the action is meant to take place, what the stakes are. We've got our dear George dancing like an idiot by himself. Good comedic way to relieve the tension of the previous scene there. Gotta love that classic car that they're in. And Marty, I'm almost 16 years old. It's not like I haven't parked before. Which, again, that flies right in the face of what she said when she was, when she becomes an adult. Oh, 18 years old, sorry. It's not like I've never parked before. Love it. And I like the fact that Marty is putting himself in the role of sexual aggressor there. That's, again, the comedic tension in this scene is brilliant, because, Marty is nervous as hell because that's his mom, and he doesn't want to have to be, in the role of sexual aggressor, despite the fact that she herself is very sexually forward with him. And, so it's just, again, there's a lot of great stuff going on here, and they both play it brilliantly. But again, yeah, Marty has to. You smoke too? Marty, you're beginning to sound just like my mother. Great reaction there. But yeah, again, there's just a lot of great stuff going on between those characters, and it's played beautifully. Even in a comedy scene, you should always have some good high tension there. That's always a really great way to make the comedy hit even more, when there's a lot of good stakes at play there. Oh yeah, and George is a little bit late for his date with Destiny there, and yeah, his mom is definitely. Why are you so nervous? Gee, I don't know. Yeah, she's very full and robust, shall we say. Where you have you ever been in a situation where you had to act a certain way, but when you got there, you didn't know if you could go through with it? Which, yeah, I mean, poor Marty. I can't even imagine having to be in that scenario. Which, now I really love this bit right here when she goes for the kiss right there. She's like, I don't worry. Goes right for the kiss there, and he's freaking out. And I like the fact that she kind of knows that something's wrong there. I'm a big fan of, in anything having to do with like sci-fi or fantasy, I like the idea that there's something that that the characters can't necessarily rationally explain, but that there's just something that inside that they know that it's wrong, even though they can't rationally explain it. Now, obviously, we know what it is that she's like, when I kiss you, it's almost like I'm kissing my brother, which, that's a great reversal there, and that's a great way to, show that, she knows that there's something up, but she can't explain it. I think that's a really great touch, and I like it when movies and TV shows do that. They don't do that very often, but I would love to see them do more of that. It's the idea of just how do you convey something that the characters couldn't really rationally explain. I don't know. That's just a great way to do it. So, and then we have our dear Biff here actually take on the role of sexual aggressor quite literally, up to and including attempted rape, which it does kind of make you wonder if something like that happened in real life. Now in the original timeline of this thing, because we don't ever really see Lorraine and Biff interact with each other in the original 1985 timeline. We don't see them interact. I think it's highly probable that something like that happened, or at least there was an attempt at it. Now, I don't think that we saw George. We didn't see George stand up for himself in the way that he does here, but it does kind of make you wonder if he did in fact attempt at sexually assaulting her, or maybe even succeeding at it at some point. We don't know. That'd be kind of interesting food for thought there. I never thought of that before, but so here goes George. He has to actually be a hero. He can't pretend to do it in the way that they had rehearsed. But good for George for really screwing his balls on here and really doing what he needs to do. It shows just how much Marty's words had really sunk in, and the fact that it is Biff, who is an actual bully, an actual opponent for him, that really makes it all the more meaningful. So again, we've got our this is like a smaller climax. It's not the primary climax, but it is a climax for one of our characters here. If you want to think of him as almost a secondary protagonist, I suppose you could think of him that way. And again, they don't make it easy for him, because Biff is kind of the dragon that our hero has to slay here, and he's gonna break his arm. He doesn't make it easy for him, and he's, especially in the sequels, we find out just the true depth of Biff's monstrosity and his cruelty. But we get a good amount of it here, even in a small way like that. We get a good sense of just what he's capable of. And you gotta give Lorraine some credit for trying to break it up there. But yeah, see, George just really, he goes for it. He knocks him out with one punch there, which I really like. You gotta give him a lot of credit for really doing exactly what he needs to do there. Yeah, knocks him right out with one punch there. It's so great. But yeah, that's, again, you want to talk about archetypes. There's the classical Beauty and the Beast kind of thing. Actually, no, it's not. Sorry, forget I said that. It's more, hero rescuing the princess from the dragon kind of archetype there. And it's done so well. Even though they're supporting characters in this story, they're still very pivotal characters, and they manage to do it in a way that really is believable. Now, again, great screenwriting here, because you think that things are in the free and clear. Marty takes a look at the picture, and you think everything's going to be hunky-dory, but no, things are not hunky-dory. There's still a high possibility that things are not going to work out. Now, again, we're getting close to third act territory here. We're still not quite there yet, but we're getting there. The tension's ratcheting up. There's quite literally a storm coming, not just in the metaphorical sense, but there is quite literally a storm coming. And again, the fact that the photo is not fully restored yet, that's a great way to keep the tension going. And again, he tries to get the band to play the song that they kiss to on the dance floor. And hey, man, the dance is over unless you know someone else that can play the guitar. So again, the setup there with Marty knowing how to play guitar and everything, that gets paid off here. But it's the fact that he has to somehow recreate the conditions by which they managed to kiss, and that's why the photograph's not fully restored yet, because the circumstances still need to take place. And interesting little thing here. You'll actually see Marty start to fade away a little bit because again, which okay, so this guy is thinking he can take Lorraine away. He looks like a dweeb himself. Look at that. Just realized what a dweeb this guy looks like, which, you know, although I can understand why George is able to, do what he needs to do with this guy, because I mean he took out Biff. This guy should be a pushover, and but again, great way to keep the tension going because you think he's gonna regress. He's gonna fall back into his old cowardly ways, and oh, I love that. His hand is fading away, and he might in fact fade away from existence. George, love it. And then, excuse me, shoves him right on the floor there. But yeah, that, and you can totally believe it because if he had the confidence to take down Biff, he can handle this pipsqueak. Which, by the way, I haven't touched on the music. Yeah, this has probably one of the best, not only soundtracks, like the songs used, like Power of Love, Back in Time, Earth Angel, all that stuff, so iconic. But the music by Alan Silvestri is some of the best ever recorded for film. Now see there's one of our ticking clocks has gotten resolved there. They are for sure going to get together. They're going to for sure have kids. Marty's existence is assured, all that kind of stuff. So that's one of our ticking clocks is resolved, and yet, we are not out of the woods yet because, again, we still got to get him back to 1985. Now here's an interesting thing. So this whole scene here, could we have, as far as our screenwriting lessons here, as far as keeping the tension moving and that kind of stuff, could we have necessarily excised this and not lost anything? Yeah, possibly. But I think what makes this scene great is that this is a little reward here for our having had one of our ticking clocks, one of our major points of tension resolved. So we get a really great kind of comedic relief scene here. But it also shows some of those generational differences here because we're playing Johnny Be Good, which is commonly credited as being the first rock and roll song. And obviously we've established that Marty is big into rock and roll, if not metal, like with Van Halen and everything. And so he starts off with our classic, the way that song's meant to be played. And then he eventually starts doing some Jimi Hendrix moves, some Van Halen moves. He starts to get a little too advanced for these 50s kids, and it has the great line, I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet, but your kids are going to love it, which, again, in terms of screenwriting, could you have excised that and not really lost anything? Yeah, you probably could have, but this scene doesn't really take up too much screen time. It is very fun. It's very entertaining. It's a good reward for that first bit of tension having been resolved. And I'm sure that, Robert Zemeckis and company probably wanted to cut loose and do, a musical number here. So, you can begrudge them, a little bit of that. And plus, like, given how much shit Marty's been through lately, he deserves a chance to cut loose. Chuck, it's Marvin, your cousin, Marvin Berry. You know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this. That's such a... I think that's such a great little Quantum Leap did that all the time. Sorry. Quantum Leap did that all the time where, like, our lead character in that show would intersect with history and would inadvertently influence a lot of famous people, and it was kind of a cute reference. This movie actually did that first. Yeah, see, he's doing a little bit of, Van Halen, a little bit of Jimi Hendrix with some of the, like, feedback, and he's getting all fancy with it. Now it's important to realize, if I recall, Michael J. Fox did not do his own singing, and I don't know how much he did or didn't know about the guitar playing or whatever, but he seemed, at least for my musically uneducated eyes, he seems to be doing a good enough job to pull it off, convincingly. I love the fact that, again, this is just a great little humorous touch for the generational differences, because, again, this came out in 1985, MTV generation, the age of heavy metal being in the mainstream, and, It's just certain things are meant to exist in their particular times, and certain things just, you bring it out too early and it's not going to be received the way it's meant to be received. And then if you bring it out too late, it seems too retro, all that stuff. She's like, that's some very interesting music. And so right here, we get a good little closeout for the younger versions of our characters here. Um, Obviously, we're going to see the adult versions of them at the very end here, but this is just a good way to say goodbye to these versions of these characters here. Marty, will we ever see you again? I guarantee it. Which, now I have to ask, if you're Lorraine and George, because like she says, Marty, such a nice name. If you're Lorraine and George and you grow up, you have your kids, all that stuff, aren't you a little weirded out that your kid happens to look exactly like that guy Marty that you knew back then? And if you're George, wouldn't you think that maybe she got up to some funny business with that other Marty guy? I don't know. I've always kind of wondered that. But then this moment right here, where he's like, if you guys ever have kids and one of them, when he's 8 years old, accidentally sets fire to the living room rug, go easy on him. That's one of my favorite moments in this whole thing, because I think, isn't that such a relatable thing that we've all had those things in our past, those little things that we wish that, maybe it was like a small thing that seemed kind of like insignificant, but it was in fact a rather traumatic event to us, so we wish we could go back and change. Damn, where is that kid? Sorry about that. Great little comedic aside there, and he's got the 3 watches there, as if that would make a difference. I think that's just a great little human moment. Now we're most definitely in Act 3 here, if we weren't already. And this whole climax here, I think, is one of the most brilliantly written, brilliantly constructed, brilliantly filmed. I think it. Yeah, he's like, he's never stood up to Biff in his life. Never? Never mind. Yeah, he's worried that it's going to cause some kind of inadvertent effect there. But yeah, this whole sequence, if you want to learn about how to make an incredibly tense, brilliantly structured climax, this whole climax is perfection. It's up there with A New Hope and the Death Star run. It's that good. I'm not even kidding. Because again, we have our mission objectives here that are set up. We've got a whole bunch of things that go wrong in the midst of all that. A lot of just ratcheting up the tension to unbelievably high levels. Like I compare it to the Death Star run for a reason, because the Death Star run in A New Hope, it's that exact thing. It's, you have a mission objective, and then it's how many parts of that plan can go wrong in one single attempt. And it's partially down to screenwriting, but it's also partially down to editing. And I think now in New Hope's case, a lot of that came down to how it was cut together, because the original cuts of that sequence, they were cut in a way that there was not a lot of tension. Like there was, one pass and then another pass and another pass, and there wasn't the in the original cut of that film, the Death Star was not orbiting Alderaan, and so there wasn't a ticking clock. That's an example of how important it is to have these other stakes going on. Now, in this case, you've got a pretty clear ticking clock that is still occurring here, and again, it's quite literally a ticking clock that we're counting on the lightning to strike it. Which again, it's like the fact that quite literally it is a ticking clock that we are concerned about. It's like in any other movie that might be a bit overt, but it's like it just works here. It really does, because the movie did its homework on everything else with characters and themes and structure and all that stuff. And the cable got disconnected. Great Scott! Which again, now talk about a plan going awry. And the lightning striking and everything. It's like, which you gotta love. Again, this movie is very archetypical in a lot of ways. Like I mentioned, master apprentice relationship, all that. One of the other archetypes is the lightning striking at the dramatic. Well, that's not a character archetype. It's more like a trope. The lightning striking at a critical moment. And the climax taking place in a storm and all that stuff. That seemingly like nature itself is now the antagonist, given time and nature are the antagonists now that Biff has been conquered. and that's one of our classical sources of conflict. There is, man versus nature. In this case, it's man versus time also. In fact, it's one of the few instances in film history that I can really think of where time itself is the primary antagonist. How often does that happen? Which, oh man, it's so tense with. I love it. Again, it's one of those things that the commentary track on its own can't really do justice to it. So hopefully you're watching along with me. But see, Marty tries. He tries so hard to save his friend. He's trying every last ditch effort. It's totally in character too, because he's got a good heart and he's trying to do right by his friend. But circumstances get in the way. Which, oh yeah, by the way, the clock chiming like that. Clocks and like bell towers and stuff, they are very loud, so his recoiling in pain, Doc's recoiling in pain, makes total sense because they're loud on purpose. Look at the time, you've got less than 4 minutes, please hurry. Love it. Off he goes, gotta get to the starting line. Which, yeah, this whole thing, it makes me so tense just watching it, because again, and think about what's really going on. There's no explosions. There's no big armies. No anything. It's really a pretty simple setup here, and yet the stakes are so high. The tension's really high, and they do slip in a little comedic relief, like here where he's trying to reconnect the cables there. But this just goes to show that you, young screenwriter, you don't have to have armies, you don't have to have tons of explosions, you don't have to have a lot of the typical things that a lot of movies have these days in order to make for an effective climax full of tension. Like this is, if you want to know how to do that effectively, this is how you do it. Because it's pretty small scale, really, when you think about it. It's a small scale story that's just, it's given the big scale treatment partially with the music, but also just how good the script is at establishing that tension and how much earnestness the actors give it. Okay, here's a really smart screenwriting move right here, where he's like, why did you tear up that letter? If only I had more time. Wait, I got all the time I want. I got a time machine. I'll go back early and warn him. Which, again, like, that's one thing you want to always do when you're writing a script, is you want to always make sure that you are accounting for possible plot holes and possible questions that the audience might ask themselves about, well, why couldn't you do this? Why couldn't you do that? Relative to what all you've set up. That's a very important thing to do. In any film, yeah, you have to always be cognizant of plot holes. And a plot hole, if you don't know, it's some aspect of the world that you've set up, of logic, of what's possible in that world that you've set up. What is it that's not making sense? How could this have worked otherwise? Or why didn't the characters choose to do this and that? Which, okay, now here's a little bit of real life tension to introduce into the situation, which is, if you know anything about DeLorean cars, they notoriously did not run very well, despite being very beautiful looking cars and everything. Part of their, kind of failure rates of like turning on and that kind of stuff, that was part of what, killed that company. And so they managed to bring that into this film in the climax there, which, again, great tension there with the cable just barely hanging on to Doc's leg and everything, like. And we actually, so remember I pointed out in the clocks in Doc's lab there, how I pointed out the fact that you saw the Harold Lloyd safety last homage there with the guy hanging off the clock. Well, we quite literally have a guy hanging off of a clock here, so that's a good visual reinforcement. I love the fact that he banged his head on the thing and it got it to work. Just like a computer, or a TV, you hit it and it works. And again, we think we're in the clear, but then, oh no, the cable just barely misses. It's just barely too short because it's stuck on the fallen limb of the tree. So again, you can't let your audience feel too safe. They squeeze every amount of tension out of this scene, up to and including the cable coming loose on the other end there, which, oh man. He screams. Love it. Yeah, you can't ever let the audience feel like they're too safe, like they know what's going to happen. But Doc manages to show some great resourcefulness there by using the cable as like a zip line down. That was a really great touch there. Um, which again, we're ratcheting up the tension. We got the car coming right to the, and Doc gets to be a real hero here, and like actually in kind of a classical Tarzan like way here with swinging down. Again, you talk about your archetypes there. That archetype has been reinforced all over the place. But it's put to brilliant use here, and it's also just great to see Doc doing something that he probably normally wouldn't do. So yeah, Marty doesn't have all the heroic moments here. We've got heroic moments across the board, and so yeah, there you go, flux capacitor. You see the rubber, starting to catch fire, all that stuff. Can't go back until the lightning strikes. Here you go, just barely in the nick of time, connects the cables, and off he goes, Back to the Future. And I just realized the movie that's playing on the screen there in the theater, the film that's playing is The Atomic Kid. How good it, that's a great touch there, because again, the DeLorean runs on electrical power, but he needed a nuclear reaction to generate the 1.21 gigawatts of electricity he needed. So you could think of Marty as kind of a 80s equivalent of the Atomic Kid. So, and of course, being in the 50s, everything was atomic this, atomic that, radiation this, radiation that. And there you go. He went back to the future. He succeeded, which, yeah, that shout of glee there from Doc is well deserved. I think, again, brilliant tension there, brilliant use of it, all that stuff. Now, again, keep in mind, it's the same place, but a different time. So we see our police chopper overhead, so already we know that it worked, and already we know we're back in 85. And now so I guess that the fact that the clock hasn't run since it got struck by lightning, so I guess nobody really thought to fix it, and the fact that historical society, they want to keep it exactly the way it is because of, we still got our that town church there. We've got that town theater being used as a church. That crazy drunk driver, and seemingly everything's back to normal. But as we'll see with the Lone Pine Mall, that we'll find out that things are not entirely back to normal. Some things have changed, and it just so happens that things have improved in Marty's life for the better. And this is why he's still not able to get to Doc in time, because the car doesn't start again. And you could this one you could understand, because it's not, just a random occurrence. I mean, the car did just go through time, so it makes sense why, the car maybe wouldn't have quite the juice left in it to keep going. And I love that the Libyan van there, that it passes by, so he has to chase after him on foot, and that's why he's still not able to catch up to Doc in time. So again, the tension is still not quite relieved. We're still, look at him, he's exhausted. And here we got Lone Pine Mall, because remember, he ran over the first one. I love seeing the same scene from another angle there. That's such a great touch there. And I love that, see, Marty's mouth opened right as he said no, as the other Marty said no. But he gets to see the same scene play out from another angle. I think that's a really great touch. That gets played up even more in part 2. But again, we're not letting the audience get off easy, because we think that it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of the Superman dilemma. It's the idea of, with all those powers, with all that, ability, that one can't save the ones that one loves. That's a classic hero dilemma here, and Marty struggles with that. But it turns out that as we're going to find out, that Doc learned some things from Marty during his time in the 50s, that he learned to take some more chances and some more risks, to not be so, afraid of adventure and that kind of stuff. So, as we're going to see, he was wearing a bulletproof vest, which that just shows that Marty's actions really did leave a great impact on the people around him. And I love that he taped up the letter there, so it showed that his impact, his actions really did play a role in shaping this man's life in a way, same way that the Doc's actions played a role in shaping Marty's life. So again, it's a great friendship there, great master, and so the master learned something from the apprentice there. Great touch. Bulletproof vest. How did you know? And all that talk about the screwing up future events, space-time continuum. Well, I figured. What the hell? Which now what's interesting though, especially if you take the sequels into, I love the fact that the paper's faded. Um, Something that that's a really great touch is the fact that Doc, some of that hubris will actually come back to bite him in part two because he does uh, jump around in time more than perhaps he should because he gets kind of carried away with the fruits of his labors. Because he slaved away on that time machine. He wants to use it, but that some of that comes back to bite him. So that's a good way to continue that character arc in the next ones. And I'm trying to really keep my comments here focused on the one film as it exists here. Trying not to bring in the sequels as much, even though I will say I think this is up there with the original Star Wars trilogy as far as one of the best film trilogies ever, because each one helps to reinforce and speak to the themes of the previous film, and as good trilogies do, if there is indeed meant to be more. But the thing that's so great about this film is that it's written as though this is going to be the only film, and so it's very self-contained, and that's something that you don't really see a whole lot of in today's kind of studio franchise model where they want to have endless sequels and spin-offs and stuff. There's something to be said about having a really good singular film that can, if more arises from a singular film, then great, icing on the cake. But if you start off with the idea that there's going to be multiple films, and sometimes that can disincentivize you to make a really great first film, to good groundwork, a bedrock on which to build everything. So again, we got another homage, visual tie to what we saw before, where he's posed in the same way. It's like, what a nightmare. It's another, like, was it all a dream, that kind of stuff. Which, again, screenwriting students never, ever, ever, ever make it just a dream. That's the cardinal sin of writing. But as we find out, it is, in fact, very much not a dream. In fact, things are quite a bit different than they were. They're living in a much nicer house. Everything's really well decorated. His brother Dave's not working at Burger King. His girlfriend is not, a lonely, spinster in the making. She's got quite a few boyfriends on the side. Dave wears a suit to the office, that sort of thing. His parents are, thin and in shape and clearly still very much in love. George is a published sci-fi author, everything like that. He's looking like a stud with his glasses and stuff, total 80s yuppies there, which is pretty funny. And I love that Marty's like falling over himself. He can't believe how great his parents look and everything. And I love that, again, the subtlety of the makeup is really effective here. I don't think that gets praised nearly as much as it should be because the subtlety of it is so great. Particularly because we saw two different versions of it. We saw one where she was heavier than she is here, and but you still see some of the effects of aging and that kind of stuff. So, and I'm watching it on the 4K restoration, and it still looks pretty good. Now there's some effects that some makeup effects that have aged a little bit, but it's not as bad as other ones that I've seen. And we get to see Biff, who's now in the role of a subservient, worker here, trying to. Well, Biff's auto detailing, and he's got a comb over and everything. So he's in a more subservient role and that kind of stuff. So that's a good sort of, yeah. He's still trying to get one over on George. He still hasn't forgotten about. He's still the same person that he was, but he's just in a more subservient role. Which again is a great touch there. So. Hey, Mr. McFly, this just arrived. It's his book. And I love the reinforcement of the, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. A match made in space. There you go. Obviously influenced by what happened to him with Marty You're all waxed up, ready for tonight. Keys. It's the Toyota there, which again, I don't know. After having driven around in a DeLorean there, I don't really know why you would bother with a car like that. I mean, then again, after all he's been through, he's kind of looking forward to some, some good old snuggle time with Jennifer there. So I'm sure that that's more what he's thinking about. That is a nice truck though. Which I love her line, Marty, you're acting like you haven't seen me in a week. I haven't, because yeah, for him, he's had a week in the past. He's a week older than he was when he left, despite, it's a minuscule difference, but it's still there. Um, and then if you take into account the sequels, he's had quite a lot more days in, well, the future, the alternate time, the alternate 1985, and the past, the 1955 and 1885. So he's aged by quite a few weeks by the time he gets back and everything returns to status quo, which this is kind of what we would now call sequel baiting, even though I don't think a sequel wasn't really in mind when they wrote this. But this totally does set up a sequel pretty clearly. Even if there hadn't been a sequel, it still would have worked as a good way to cap everything off. But it picks up, it transitions into part two really nicely. But again, it's like movies these days, they try too hard to set up like the franchise model and things like that. But this, it feels very organic, this like, could there be a sequel? Yeah, absolutely. But even if there wasn't, it would still work as a movie. And poor Jennifer's like, what the fuck? What's up with all this? And Doc, we better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88. Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads. Iconic line. That's the final line. Iconic ending line for an iconic film. And then, of course, the car flies, which is a big deal. And flies right at the screen. And then we end with Back in Time. And it's all amazing stuff. Man, just watching it again, even for the sake of this commentary, it's like you just realize just how well set up the film is and how effectively it accomplishes what it sets out to do. It blends its tones so well, has iconic dialogue, iconic moments, and it's just, again, it's got one of the best scripts I think that's ever been written for film, and my commentary can't really do justice to that fact in and of itself, but hopefully for those of you who are interested in screenwriting, as a profession or just as something to do for your own films and stuff, hopefully you'll use this as a bit of a model, or at least as an entree to understanding just how you can make effective screenplays on the structural level, on the dialogue level, on the maintaining tension, and the blending your tones and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's just so much great stuff to talk about in this film. And again, I never noticed this. DeLorean time travel consultant Ron Cobb. I didn't even know that was a credit in this film. That's funny. I like that. Yeah, so hopefully you guys got something out of that. This is something that I'm going to try to do at least once a week. Do you want me to do part two? Because we're kind of on that same kick. It would kind of help to, transition into the next part of the story. And, you'll see, because the structures of part two and three are different. I just wanted to start with this one because it's such a well-known film. It's such a easily accessible film. Everybody knows it. Everyone loves it. And, hopefully it would help to give you an idea of how the masters have done it. Honestly, the best way to learn about film is to study your favorite films, why they work, and, just how can you learn from, what all they did well. So, yeah, the credits are rolling now. I won't keep you too much longer, but yeah, so I am, just to wrap it up here, I am Dane Kyle. I'm a filmmaker myself, and this has been the first podcast for No Money Film School. And we're going to be doing a lot more of these in the future. Let me know if there are any particular films you want me to talk about, and from what perspectives you want me to talk about them. I kept it very screenwriting focused for this one, but I do plan to highlight certain films for examples of like cinematography, examples of direction, acting, which I touched on that a little bit here, but In some films, I want to touch on that maybe they weren't the best received, but another lesson to learn are some of those films that maybe they didn't turn out as well as the filmmakers had thought, and what lessons can be learned from that, or from a film that maybe the mainstream didn't receive it all that well, but it has a cult following. There are all kinds of lessons to be learned from all kinds of movies. Let me know what kind of movies you'd like me to talk about, and I'm going to try to do these at least once a week, and yeah, hopefully this was helpful to you. So hopefully you have a good morning, noon, night, or whenever you're listening to this, and continue writing, continue making films, continue experimenting, because the next generation of filmmakers out there, they have to learn from the masters, and hopefully I can kind of bring that to you in my own weird way. So I am Dane Kyle, signing off. Good night, everyone.